Now, in news just in, South African Airways has been stopped by the South African Civil Aviation Authority from flying to Brussels Sunday to fetch the first batch of the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. This is due to the risk measures not being adequate enough or acceptable within global aviation standards. TUI charter flights flew the vehicle into the country late on Thursday night. The main concern that the Civil Aviation Authority had, and which led to the declining of the initial application by SAA, was in relation to the recency of the national carrier's flight deck crew. SAA managed to get the selected flight crew to attend the mandatory recency training, as it's called. SAA was granted exemption Wednesday after it resubmitted their application. The Department of Public Enterprises says it will not comment on the matter. Meanwhile, the SAA business rescue practitioners say they are aware that the flight was stopped. All right, Heidi Giokos is following this story for us. And Heidi, I understand that you can take it a little further.
Yes, indeed. We are joined by the CEO of the Civil Aviation Authority, Poppy Khoza. Thanks so much for your time, Ms. Khoza. I would just like to start off with why the Civil Aviation Authority decided to stop the flights from taking place on Sunday by SAA. What were the reasons for the Civil Aviation Authority to do this?
So let me firstly clarify that the South African Civil Aviation Authority did not stop nor declined the flight from operating. Consistent with the provisions of legislation, the civil aviation regulations, any operator can apply for an exemption and or alternative means of compliance. South African Airways did contact the South African Civil Aviation Authority requesting for an exemption, particularly relating to their aircrew. An exemption which, when we evaluated, there were some gaps. And of course, by its nature, any exemption, it becomes a process between the regulator and the operator. So there were ongoing conversations or discussions between us as the Civil Aviation Authority and the operator, South African Airways, in terms of our expectations as per the regulations in order for us to approve and or decline the exemption, as it were. But I must indicate that the exemption was subsequently, after SAA had demonstrated compliance with legislation, we subsequently did approve that exemption on the 16th of February. So we did not decline, and of course SAA had to follow the process as provided for in the legislation in order to empower the Civil Aviation Authority to approve accordingly.
Ms. Khoza, could you explain to us what some of the gaps were for this flight not taking off? We do understand that there's certain flight hours that need to be conducted by pilots. Just go through some of the reasons as to why there were gaps and what those gaps were.
So without necessarily getting into technical discussion, but whenever we evaluate any exemption, there are specific requirements that we'll be looking for, details specific, for instance, to a pilot whom they're applying for an exemption. We will need all the details in terms of medical license or certificate, when last were they trained, just those nitty-gritty or technical details in terms of arriving at a particular decision. Of course, South African Airways has not been operating, as you know, Heidi, for quite some time. And therefore, we ought to have satisfied ourselves that indeed the pilots would have been attended the recency or pilot proficiency training and so on. So all those had to be taken individually in relation to a specific pilot, looking at the issues of do they have the valid license, for instance, are they meeting the requirements to the T? And then the whole package in terms of that application would have to be looked at.
Ms. Khoza, just quickly, have these requirements been met, and will SAA be allowed to fly should they need to, operate any cargo flights or repatriation flights?
So I must indicate that this specific exemption that SAA had applied for was for a specific flight, and it was a flight to Brussels. And therefore, if they will intend, for instance, to fly to another destination, equally we will have to go back to the drawing board to look at the requirements that are commensurate. For instance, what type of an aircraft that they wish to fly, what type of a flight that they want to undertake. Is it just cargo, or will it be a charter operator involving passengers? So each and every exemption, we look at the specific detail for that particular operation.
Okay, thanks so much for your time.
So it is not given that we give blanket exemptions. They are taken based on their own specific operations.
Okay, thanks so much for that clarity. We appreciate it. That's the CEO of the Civil Aviation Authority, Khoza. Let's take a look at your indicators.